I must say my job is to introduce bottom of the pyramid technology in a country that seems to be quite aware of technology already. I had this recent, in my building we have a cargo lift and I have a dog and the dog has to go through the cargo lift. So while I was going down with my dog one day, I had this, overheard this conversation between the guy who operates the cargo lift, which if you know, in the hierarchy of lift people is the bottom of the hierarchy. The cargo lift is the worst lift in the building. So he's at the bottom of his pyramid. And he was having this conversation with one more guy on buying a mobile phone a second-hand mobile phone from this guy. And he finally rejects it because that mobile phone does not run the Android ice cream sandwich. It turns out he's not buying one of these, chinny-winny Nokia phones. He's buying a 3.5-inch screen Android Galaxy. So, we are in a country where Airtel advertises that it's not the Panwala, but the Panwala's assistant who has a phone. So, we've already progressed quite a bit in technology having gone down to the common man, at least the awareness of technology. But the challenge of India remains. India is nevertheless one of the most unequal societies in the world. There are parts of India that haven't left the Middle Ages. There are parts of India, we have space flight and, parts of Bombay both look like and cost like New York. And that probably is the biggest challenge we will face. Why it is important for commercial solutions to come up is because governments typically are not very good at producing social inequality. The world over, Western capitalism and China's rather aggressive move out of socialism has done more for reducing poverty, and including India's move out of socialism, has done more for reducing poverty than any smart government has done in the last, 1,000 years. There is no real example of bottom of the pyramid improvement of an economy without competitive pressures, without reasonably profitable, not necessarily, hugely profitable, but reasonably profitable ventures addressing the common man. And that's probably the challenge of transforming India. Inequality is important, with very high levels of inequality, we will never become a Shanghai or a Singapore. And at least I would rather live in a society with clean roads and, a functioning train system. And therefore it is important for all of us to figure out how to reduce this inequality, or at least make sure that the bottom is not below a level that, that prevents them from going forward and participating in an economic miracle. An economy of 1 billion people is always going to be stronger than the economy of 300 million people with 1 billion people watching on. And that is our challenge. That, I think, is the challenge of the real India. See, this is where technology fails a little. So, India has undeniably grown. It's grown, it's got an amazing growth story. It's gone from when the British left, India used to have a hard time manufacturing pins and, safety pins and anything but basic cloth. And from there it's gone to being, well, not necessarily a manufacturing superpower, but definitely it has its own steel plants, it has its own rocket engines, it has a huge IT industry. It is nevertheless a very large growth story. But at the same time, it turns out that not only do we have inequality, we have inequality that is growing. A large part of India is not, and the way they measure it is by measuring consumption. How many things do rural Indians buy and how fast is that growing, as opposed to how many things urban Indians buy and how fast is that growing. And the gap between people who are well off and how much they consume and people who are badly off and how much they consume is growing. So in that sense, we're doing something wrong. We're actually holding our economy back. We are not addressing effectively, from the private sector or the capitalist point of view, the bottom of the pyramid. We are losing the bottom of the pyramid. The bottom is falling out of our reach. And this story is across the board, in health, in education, everywhere you see, it is not the intention to spend that matters. Everywhere India has been surveyed, every village, education is valued. People starve themselves to send their children to school. But at a certain point, they are even with a certain amount of deprivation, they're unable to send their children. It is very few communities in India which say, I don't want to send my children to school even if I can afford it. That is pretty much unheard of anywhere in India. The same with health. You're not going to obviously say, I'd rather be sick and not spend money on it. The question isn't the intent. The question is, we are not able to capitalize on these opportunities. And I think that we should see as the biggest challenge of real India. It is both a challenge from a pure social point of view, in the sense that we want, of course, India to be a rich country, we want to live, we want to do good to 1 billion people, but also, you realize China is going to, in the next year, have more billionaires with a B, than the US. Today, US still leads, but not by much. And China, all the billionaires are homegrown. There's no such thing as an imported billionaire. It's not a billionaire who made his money selling stuff in the US. They made their money selling stuff in China. Because unlike India's middle class, China has a middle class 6 times the size, in spite of the population only being a little more than 20%. It has, infrastructure that is amazing. I went to Shenzhen 14 years ago. And that time Shenzhen was a bunch of tall buildings, a huge expressway in the middle and another bunch of tall buildings. I went to Shenzhen recently and I was thinking, okay, I'll see this, and I was telling the guy with me, you'll see this whole, and of course there's no gap in the middle. There is of course no longer a single expressway. There's about 40 of them now. There's flyovers. There's no sign of any gaps. And somebody has made a lot of, progress. That progress has spurred on not just the 200 billionaires in China, but also pretty much everybody in China. Chinese people, you see more iPhones in the streets of China than you will see. Even my liftman is only buying a second-hand, middle-of-the-line Samsung after all. So improved governance, financial inclusion, affordable healthcare, effective education, these are the 4 topics I think SP Jain has done a great job of choosing. I think these are the 4 most affected by technology, but also the ones that have the largest impact in transforming a country into a more prosperous one. Governance, we are going through a very unusual time. We are going through a time where politics or political parties are finding it hard to remain relevant. The Arab Spring was entirely independent of a political movement. And of course, India has done this before. Gandhi, when he finally did his Quit India movement, was not part of any party. He had actually been expelled or pushed out of Congress, had gone back to Sabarmati Ashram, and was writing his memoirs when the Quit India movement, the events that led up to Quit India movement happened. And he was able to organize an entire nation, entirely bypass Congress in the process. Congress initially did not want to participate in it. In fact, they wanted Swaraj and not independence. And so India has been at it before. The Arab Spring was entirely, a Google executive started the Arab Spring. It started with the events of a suicide, but a Google executive started the whole business of organization, and eventually it became such a big thing that it toppled not 1 but 5 governments. Political parties used to be the way we organize popular opinion. They were unions used to represent workers' interests. Political parties would represent the individual interests of different versions of morality, of opinion. Now, self-organizing movements do not need political parties. The Delhi protests did not need a Congress or a BJP or somebody to front-end it. Why do you need to front-end it? Because somebody needs to organize it. That is no longer necessary. Nobody needs to organize it. You can literally send out a message and be self-organizing. And that is going to change the nature of politics. It's going to force governments, not politics, not political parties themselves. Political parties will become irrelevant and die away. Governments can't die away. Governments have to respond to this change in politics. And I think they will respond in 4 ways. They will respond, 1, by increasing transparency. They will let the individual citizen directly see what's going on in government, rather than having to go through a union representative or a political party or your MP and MLA or your corporator. You should be able to see what's going on. Why should you have to go through a representative, an official authorized person? And that is increasingly happening. RTI Act has changed the face of India. I applied for my gas connection. I used the RTI Act to see where my application was. it's become so widespread that essentially it has changed the way many, many departments operate. They are forced to publish information, they are forced to make information easily available, they are forced to make information available in a way that an individual citizen without any support system can consume. That's a big change. There is a lot of opportunity in taking this information and making it even more easy to access. So if you followed the US elections, which is probably the world's most open democracy, I mean, their elections is like our elections. I probably know what to vote for with Obama more than I know what to vote for with my local MP. It's the world's most, discussed election, right? It's also the world's most socially organized election. And if you've noticed in the whole organization, there's a lot of technology that has gone into it, and a lot of people have actually commercialized this technology. They've studied what opinions are shaping the world, shaping their nation, how that is collected, how it is analyzed. In fact, it is said that Obama had a 63% or something like that, some 60-something percent likelihood that the person he calls is likely to vote for him, whereas Mitt Romney had only a 20-something percent. Because Mitt Romney's, they invested a lot less in technology. Speed of delivery is another place where, one, of course, commoditization of businesses have made us impatient. But India has been one of the worst culprits in terms of how fast we move. It takes us forever to open a business. It takes, recently apparently every Walmart store requires 51 licenses apparently. That's today's news. It takes somebody some time to even count how many licenses, right? And this speed of delivery, technology is going to play a big role in enabling. Worldwide, in the West, this has traditionally been information intermediaries that have speeded this up. Even in France, there's 51 or 100 or whatever permissions. France is a horribly red tape country. Italy is a horribly red tape country. But there are intermediaries that make this process a lot faster. And that's where the technology, the role of technology is probably the greatest. You also need, India is still going to not have as many roads as you want. You're still going to need to deliver governance. The ability to do simple things, to see a land records, to see whether, what your property is, or if you're buying something, who is the owner of that property, is, I am from an agricultural family, and I can tell you, at least when I was growing up, this was a huge challenge. It would take you 15 days and maybe 10 trips to the local collector's office to see if a property was owned by the person you were buying it from. And if it happened to not be clear, that would take you months to verify. Today, that is not the case. Today, this last apartment that I moved into on rent, they actually scanned everything, including the signature. The government official who signs also is signing electronically. A thumbprint scanner is brought to him, he signs on that. And it is available instantly. I went to the police verification, the police guys tapped out something and, a printout of the scan came out. So, the ability to expand governance to tiny corners of India, and unfortunately India has a lot of tiny corners. Even Bombay to Goa is a 7-hour drive, even though it's not that far away. This expansion is going to become very important. And of course, democracy will change. The more we have, the more the common man has access to information, to speed of delivery, or lack of speed of delivery of certain services. Technology is going to enable more people to voice a protest directly, to decide it is no longer, it is no longer going to be necessary for the Congress party to tell you who to vote for. Now, just before Accenture, I used to be with India Infoline, where financial inclusion was a very important imperative. India is one of the most, probably the most financially unequal large country in the world. Only 35% of Indians have bank accounts. This compares to something like 72% of Chinese have bank accounts. The only thing it comes anywhere close to is the illegal population, not the legal population. The illegal immigrants of US have a bank account rate of 30%. Even illegals in the US, Mexicans who came across the border, or Vietnamese who came by boat, even they have a banking rate that is a little bit better than Indians who are in their native country. This is horrible. I mean, it is partly a failure of the system. It is partly an over-regulation effect. It is partly just the fact that the banking sector in India, so heavily public sector, never bothered to step out beyond the few conclaves that it had. Even though SBI had the largest number of branches, those branches never gave loans, never went on any account opening drive. They basically just did not do very much. This lack of credit is probably the biggest reason for rural poverty. Almost everybody in rural India, everybody who is either a borrower or a lender. In rural India, the money lender rules the world. Because India is very dependent on agriculture, whose income is very spiky. And the entire spikiness is evened out by money lenders, who lend at incredible rates. If you will ask any of your domestic staff, they will have loans that are at least 10 or 12 times their income. That's just the way it is. It's the way of life in India to borrow money. But since there is no banking, everybody borrows money from the local money lender informally at humongous rates. I mean, we are talking about 10% a month kind of rates. This used to be the case in the US. In the US also, finance did not develop overnight. There were many of these, many scams that caused finance to become widespread. We are hoping that financial inclusion, particularly banking inclusion, stock markets reach every corner of India. Primarily, NSE has done a wonderful job of building a satellite network. So I've been to, I studied in Kharagpur. So I went to visit the IIFL Kharagpur branch. And apparently, Kharagpur has a lot of school teachers who trade in commodities. Commodities is the most difficult thing. I'm sure some of you must be finance majors. Options and futures in commodities is a complex instrument. It is not simple to understand, leave alone trade in. Yet there are school teachers in Kharagpur with, a few thousand rupees in income who are trading in commodities. Good thing, bad thing, we don't know, but at least they are part of a financial system. That's how technology changes finance. The other thing that probably will change finance is micropayments through electronic devices. Like Vodafone is present here, and this has gone through a major revolution in Africa. In Kenya in particular, microwave payments have changed the world. In India, it has started off, and it's still a very new concept. The ecosystem is still building up. There aren't enough people, there aren't enough places for you to use electronic money here yet. But that will change. One of the key reasons for financial inclusion is the remoteness of branches, of banks to people. And mobile payments will change that. E-commerce. I used to be part of an e-commerce venture a while ago, and even now, metros account for less than 50% of the sales of e-commerce products. Because in metros, it is relatively easy. Yes, you would think that there are more internet terminals, there are more sales. But that's not true, Commerce is a function of availability, supply versus demand. If you go to small town India, I grew up in Asansol, you ordered a TV by looking at a catalog. You literally, the guy would say, oh, these are the 2 TVs I have, but actually these are 5 years old. They have not been sold. This is the actual current set of TVs. Order from here, pay in advance, and a week later your TV will land up. That's how we bought TVs. That's how we bought fridges. That's how we bought everything. That's how we bought even, food items. If your flavor of Maggi ran out, the local guy would say, place an order. 3-4 days later, we'll get it for you. Which, except for the E part, sounds like e-commerce. Healthcare. India is one of those huge contrasts in healthcare. We have some of the best healthcare in the world in cities. There are hospitals in Bombay, there are hospitals in Delhi that deliver better healthcare outcomes than many of the hospitals anywhere in the world. There are doctors, for instance, there are doctors that have more cardiac operations than anywhere in the world. We have more cataract operations than anywhere in the world. We have knee replacement surgeries that have better success rates in India than worldwide. India has become a medical tourism destination. But it is a very, very, very skewed picture. How skewed? India is 3 times the US average for cities and 1/3 the US average for non-cities, for non-metros. Except that 80% of India lives in non-metros. So the average is horrible. We have, just to give you how bad it is, we have a lower bed ratio than Iran. Better than Afghanistan, but that isn't saying very much. But worse than Iran. And this is unlikely to change. Medical infrastructure, like road infrastructure, takes a long time to build. It's not going to happen overnight. So the opportunity is to use technology to mitigate it. So you cannot replace a hospital bed using technology. You cannot replace. It's a fallacy to say we can replace a doctor using technology or replace a nurse. Or replace a teacher, which we'll come to later. It's not possible. It's just a silly idea to try. What you can do is mitigate the effects of it. The fact is, you have a poor ratio of doctors to patients. It's a very low ratio. If you cannot change that, what you can do is amplify the effect of a doctor's reach. One of the biggest killers of India, for instance, is diarrhea. And diarrhea has a few causes. But much of diarrhea can be treated using nursing staff rather than doctors, except that you need a certain amount of support from a knowledge base. And that kind of support is relatively easily delivered using a mobile phone. And that's what's happening in places. It is relatively easy to enhance the capabilities of existing medical staff and therefore substantially improve the outcomes using technology. We get these periodic things about how we can entirely get into, remote surgery and stuff like that. The fact is, remote surgery costs 10 times more than direct surgery. It is actually cheaper to fly a surgeon down to that remote village in India than to do remote surgery in that village in India. And it's unlikely to change that kind of thing. The fact is, you cannot substitute. Healthcare and education is very, very knowledge-centric. It is not data-centric. It is unlikely to be substitutable purely by a database setup. Except when, maybe in another 50 years, artificial intelligence comes to a point where a lot of decisions can be made by computers. So, however, the other place where, especially India has done a good job in this, healthcare administration costs are what is killing the US. US has some of the world's highest administration costs. But this is true of India also. Administrative costs are a very large overhead in any hospital or any healthcare setup that you go to. That is something that technology is brilliant at reducing. Technology is brilliant at figuring out where waste goes, what leads to what outcomes, and how to allocate better. And that is somewhere we should aggressively pursue. There is no reason why our hospitals should be run on paper and therefore not know what is our bed occupancy at any instant of time. Okay, the Taj Hotel knows. Why shouldn't the hospital next door know? The other thing is that technology will bring frugal innovation. There are medical devices that are today disproportionately expensive. A doctor can't help you if there is no device to help you with. And there, GE, for instance, has done this, I'm sure you've seen the ads, the inexpensive incubator, where a baby delivered prematurely. Incubators they've taken the cost of an incubator down some 1/5 of the original cost. And it runs on very low amounts of electricity that can be powered by a battery. These kinds of device innovation is going to play a very key role in improving healthcare in India. Education is another story. I am not a strong believer in the Akash tablet. Not because I don't think the price point can be delivered, but I think that we are substituting the ability. Teaching is not about dumping a bunch of knowledge. If that could be, you could just, distribute the books and be done with it. A book, all said and done, no matter how expensive, is going to be cheaper than the Akash. The thing is, education isn't about books. It's about trying to persuade the child to read it. And that is not going to be solved by the Akash tablet. Akash tablet will probably end up being a good gaming device. Or a bad gaming device, I don't know. But the fact is, in India, the lack of teachers is going to be a big, or the lack of teachers, the lack of, good teachers, absenteeism, the lack of physical schools is going to remain a problem. And technology cannot solve that part of the problem. What it can solve is the information distribution part. Schools have very poor access to libraries. In India in particularly, there are no libraries. And that can be changed by technology. India has no access to encyclopedias. That can be changed by technology. Wikipedia is probably the greatest thing that has happened to education in the last 10 years, including our own education. Everything goes wrong, I look it up at Wikipedia, right? Yesterday we want to know if it was Dahlia or Dahlia. I looked it up in Wikipedia, the flower. It turns out it's named after a botanist called Dahl, so it must be Dahlia. But there's some controversy. That kind of thing is what technology is very good at. Again, don't substitute a teacher, but you can make his life a lot easier. You can track student patterns, you can track allocation of where should you put a school so that the least number of, the lowest transport cost is incurred. In India, that doesn't happen. People don't plan it that way because, schools are put up where politicians want their schools to be put up. Not because politicians are necessarily bad, but because there is no planning behind it. There's no central plan that says a school should be here and not there. So the politician says, I'll put it up wherever I get the best mileage. And that can change. So those things are where technology plays the biggest role, and also where private companies are probably going to make money, because that's, people will pay small amounts of money, just like they pay money to libraries. They will pay money to access information. They will pay money to access better support tools for education. They already pay money to get to schools. Most parents are willing to put aside substantial amounts of their income to teach their kids. And this is something that is by and large unexploited. This is all I have. The last line I want to leave you with is that, it benefits all of us to live in a less unequal society. We do not think of progress. We think of our own individual progress, our own individual incomes, our own individual standards of living going up. But history has shown us repeatedly that that cannot happen if the bottom is too far below us. There is a limit to how much difference. Either it leads to revolution or it leads to collapse of society. It's bound to happen. It's happened every time that has happened, from the Roman Empire onwards. It has happened every time that the gap has grown too big. Either it has led to violent revolution, in which case the society that we want to inhabit, the part that the top of the pyramid that we want to inhabit has been destroyed, including the pyramids themselves. Or it has led to the society itself failing and dying out. And hopefully we want neither to happen. Also, as technology goes, we are in this era where the ability to use technology is well understood, but the actual products are not yet prevalent, and that is what provides us the opportunity. Provides us as entrepreneurs, as businessmen, the opportunity to make money, and also us as new leaders of India, the opportunity to make a difference to the world. That's one of the reasons that a Western world is less exciting for entrepreneurs and companies, because these gaps don't exist anymore. The gaps have become narrower and narrower and narrower. In India, there's such gaping gaps, so there's so much more to make use of. The biggest success story in the world at the bottom of the pyramid was McDonald's. McDonald's was meant for the poor people of the US. Now the poor people are gone, but McDonald's is certainly realized more money out of the bottom than we can possibly imagine. Similar stories exist all over India, or the similar gap exists all over India. And we understand technology at the top. We have the ability. The technology is being available to us at a scale that never used to be the case. Technology has become, a call has become a few paisa each. All these enablements did not exist 10 years ago. So the opportunity did not exist on the same scale 10 years ago. So that is my message. take the opportunity, build something.